History books tell you World War I ended in the trenches of France. Generals on horseback, machine guns mowing down a generation, American doughboys storming across no man's land in 1918. This version is a lie by omission. The Great War ended 3 years before the armistice. It ended in a wood-paneled office on Wall Street. It ended when a group of American bankers signed documents transferring billions of dollars to Britain and France while Germany watched from behind a financial blockade it never understood and could not breach. Guns did not decide this war. Ledgers did. The German military machine remained fearsome until its final days. German soldiers still held foreign territory when the government surrendered. No Allied army ever fought on German soil. The Kaiser's forces did not collapse from battlefield defeat in the traditional sense. They collapsed because the money ran out. Germany made a fatal choice in August 1914. The Kaiser's financial advisors believed the war would last months. They funded operations through domestic bond sales to their own citizens. They printed money. They borrowed from themselves. Britain made the opposite choice. The British Treasury understood from the first week of fighting that this war would become a contest of industrial production. And industrial production required raw materials, machine tools, and ammunition components from the greatest neutral manufacturing power on earth, the United States. To buy American goods, Britain needed American dollars. To get American dollars in sufficient quantity, Britain needed access to American credit markets. To access American credit markets, Britain needed J.P. Morgan. This is the story of how a single banking syndicate became more important to Allied victory than any general. How $3 billion in loans predetermined the outcome of a conflict that killed 20 million people. How the flow of capital from New York to London created a financial architecture so powerful it would dominate the next century. Welcome to Noob Historian. We follow the money, trace the power, and expose the history they never taught you in school. You live inside the system these loans created. Your dollars carry value because of decisions made in 1914. Your government wields financial sanctions as weapons because American bankers learned during WWI how to weaponize credit access. When you read about countries being cut off from SWIFT or frozen out of dollar markets, you witness the direct descendant of the financial warfare first deployed against Imperial Germany. The guns of August 1914 get the monuments. The loans of October 1915 get forgotten. This is intentional. The men who engineered this system preferred to operate without monuments. Let us begin where the story truly starts. Not in Sarajevo. In the vaults beneath the Bank of England. When war erupted in summer 1914, Britain possessed the world's largest gold reserves. The pound sterling functioned as the global reserve currency. London served as the clearinghouse for international trade. British banks financed commerce on every continent. This position seemed unassailable. It was not. Britain faced a problem invisible to the public but terrifying to Treasury officials. The British economy in 1914 depended on imports for survival. The island nation imported most of its food. It imported the raw materials for its factories. It imported the components for its weapons. Before the war, Britain paid for imports through a sophisticated system of trade credits and financial instruments cleared through London banks. The City of London functioned as the heart-pumping financial blood through the arteries of global commerce. War disrupted the system overnight. International trade routes fractured. Insurance rates for shipping exploded. Foreign banks hoarded gold rather than extending credit. The smooth financial machinery of the Victorian era ground to a halt. Britain now faced the ancient problem of all trading empires at war: how to pay for the imports needed to fight while export revenues collapsed. Chancellor of the Exchequer, David Lloyd. George understood this problem within days of the war's outbreak. His Treasury memoranda from August 1914 reveal stark calculations. Britain could sustain current expenditure levels for approximately 1 year using existing gold reserves and financial instruments. After that, the mathematics became impossible. 1 year was not enough. Everyone expected a short war. The financiers knew otherwise. The Treasury papers now housed in Kew tell a story of controlled panic. British officials recognized almost immediately that victory would require American resources purchased with American money. The question was how to arrange this without appearing desperate and without violating American neutrality laws. They found their answer in a man named Jack Morgan. John Pierpont Morgan Jr. inherited control of the most influential banking house in America when his father died in 1913. The younger Morgan, known as Jack, lacked his father's volcanic personality, but shared his instincts for power accumulation. Jack Morgan also held deep personal ties to Britain. He maintained a country estate in England. His social circle included British aristocrats. His business relationships with London banks stretched back decades. When the British government needed a financial ally in New York, Morgan was the obvious choice. The relationship formalized quickly after war began. In January 1915, the British government appointed J.P. Morgan & Coers as its exclusive purchasing agent in the United States. This appointment transformed a private bank into an arm of British war strategy. Every bullet, every shell casing, every bolt of uniform cloth, every can of preserved beef purchased for the British military in America would flow through Morgan's hands. The purchasing agent role generated enormous profits. Morgan took commissions on billions of dollars in orders, but the real power lay elsewhere. As purchasing agent, Morgan gained complete visibility into Allied military supply chains. The bank knew which American factories produced what goods. It knew which suppliers offered the best prices. It knew where bottlenecks existed in production. It knew the exact state of Allied ammunition reserves. This information was worth more than any commission. Morgan used this visibility to engineer supply chains favoring Allied interests. The bank could direct orders toward factories willing to prioritize Allied contracts. It could identify production capacity before competitors. It could shape the American industrial base toward Allied needs. The American economy began reorganizing around Allied orders before the United States entered the war. Morgan's coordination accelerated this reorganization. American factories retooled. American workers shifted into war production. American capitalists invested in plants serving Allied demand. By 1916, the American economy was functionally integrated with the Allied war effort. This integration happened through private banking channels, not government policy. It happened because J.P. Morgan made it happen. The purchasing agent role was only the beginning. Britain needed more than a purchasing agent. Britain needed a banker willing to extend credit on a scale no private institution had ever attempted. Here, the story becomes about leverage in its purest form. Britain possessed vast assets. The British Empire controlled territories spanning the globe. British citizens held enormous investments in American companies, American railroads, and American real estate. These assets represented real wealth. But wealth locked in long-term investments cannot buy artillery shells. Britain needed to convert its stored wealth into liquid capital available for immediate war purchases. This conversion required American financial cooperation. Morgan organized the conversion. The first major operation targeted British-held American securities. The British Treasury ordered its citizens to surrender their American railroad stocks, American industrial shares, and American bonds. The government paid for these securities in British war bonds. Then, the Treasury shipped the American securities across the Atlantic to Morgan's vaults. Morgan used these securities as collateral for loans to the British government. American investors would lend money secured against American assets, even though the borrower was a foreign belligerent. The structure worked because the collateral was familiar and liquid. This extraction of British private wealth continued throughout the war. Citizens who had spent decades accumulating American investments watched their portfolios converted into government IOUs. The transfer of wealth from British private hands to American creditor hands represented one of the largest asset movements in financial history. Britain was mortgaging its empire to buy American bullets. The securities collateral arrangement provided substantial funding, but remained insufficient for the scale of expenditure the war demanded. Britain needed direct access to American credit markets. Britain needed American citizens to lend money directly to a foreign nation at war. In 1915, this was illegal. American neutrality laws prohibited loans to belligerent nations. The Wilson administration had publicly stated its opposition to war loans as inconsistent with genuine neutrality. Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan took a particularly hard line against any financial entanglement with warring powers. Morgan and his allies needed to change the administration's position. The pressure campaign against American neutrality in financial matters began in early 1915 and succeeded by autumn. Morgan partners cultivated relationships throughout the Wilson administration. They argued that blocking loans to the Allies would damage American economic interests. American factories had retooled for Allied orders. American farmers had expanded production for Allied food purchases. American workers depended on Allied demand for their jobs. Blocking credit to the Allies would crash the American economy. This was the argument. It was also true. The American economy had become dependent on Allied orders precisely because Morgan had structured it that way. Secretary Bryan resigned in June 1915 over a different issue, the administration's response to the Lusitania sinking. His departure removed the strongest voice against financial entanglement. His successor, Robert Lansing, held far more flexible views on neutrality. By September 1915, the administration quietly reversed its position on war loans. The new policy stated that the government would not formally approve foreign loans, but would also not interfere with private lending decisions. Banks were free to lend to belligerents at their own risk. The door was open. Morgan moved immediately. In October 1915, the bank organized the Anglo-French Loan, a $500 million credit facility for Britain and France. This was the first mass-marketed foreign war bond in American history. The loan structure revealed the sophistication of Morgan's approach. Rather than a private placement with wealthy investors, Morgan organized a public bond offering. The bank recruited a syndicate of over 1,500 American banks and financial institutions to distribute the bonds. Ordinary Americans could purchase Anglo-French bonds through their local banks. This distribution strategy served multiple purposes. It spread the financial risk across the American financial system. rather than concentrating it in a few large institutions. It created a vast constituency of American bondholders with direct financial interest in Allied victory. It made the American public complicit in the Allied war effort. When you own a bond, you root for the borrower to win. The Anglo-French loan succeeded beyond expectations. American investors purchased the entire $500 million offering. The appetite for Allied bonds among American savers proved substantial. Morgan had demonstrated that American capital markets would finance the Allied war. This first loan opened the floodgates. Over the next 2 years, Morgan organized additional loans totaling over $2.5 billion for Britain, France, and other Allied nations. Each loan created more American bondholders with more financial interest in Allied victory. The concentrated flow of capital from American savers to Allied treasuries restructured global finance. Before 1914, the United States was a debtor nation. Americans owed more to foreign investors than foreign investors owed to Americans. By 1918, the United States was the world's largest creditor nation. Foreign governments owed Americans billions. The power shift was structural and permanent. Morgan's position as the gatekeeper for Allied credit access gave the bank extraordinary leverage. The bank could impose conditions on loans. It could influence how borrowed funds were spent. It could shape Allied purchasing decisions to favor certain American industries over others. The bank's internal memoranda from this period reveal the conscious exercise of this power. Morgan partners understood they were not merely financing a war, they were building a new financial infrastructure with themselves at the center. Germany watched this process with growing alarm and complete inability to respond. The German Empire entered World War I with formidable strengths. Its army was the finest in Europe. Its industrial base was second only to America's. Its scientific and technical capabilities led the world in multiple fields. Its population was educated, disciplined, and loyal. Germany's weakness was invisible until the war began. It lacked access to the financial infrastructure controlled by its enemies. London dominated global finance in 1914. The British pound sterling served as the primary currency for international trade. British banks provided the credit facilities enabling commerce across borders. British insurance companies covered the risks of shipping. British legal frameworks governed international contracts. When war erupted, Britain weaponized this infrastructure against Germany. The British blockade receives attention in military histories. Naval forces preventing goods from reaching German ports, ships searched and cargoes seized, neutral vessels warned away from German trade. The financial blockade receives less attention but proved equally devastating. British authorities froze German assets held in London banks. They blocked German access to the international payment systems cleared through the city. They pressured neutral banks and businesses to refuse dealings with German counterparties. They threatened any neutral financial institution helping Germany with exclusion from British financial networks. The choice presented to neutral financiers was simple: do business with Germany or do business with the entire British Empire. Most chose the Empire. Germany found itself cut off from international credit markets within weeks of the war's start. German agents attempted to arrange loans in New York, Amsterdam, and Zurich. They found doors closed everywhere. American banks unwilling to risk British displeasure, Dutch banks dependent on London clearing, Swiss banks cautious about backing a losing side. The Reichsbank records now held in Berlin document the mounting desperation of German financial officials. They recognized the Allied strategy. They understood its implications. They lacked the means to counter it. Germany turned inward. Unable to borrow internationally, the Kaiser's government borrowed from its own citizens. The first German war bond drive launched in September 1914. 8 more would follow over the next 4 years. These Kriegsanleihen would raise 97 billion marks from German savers. The war bond campaigns became massive propaganda exercises. The government plastered cities with posters urging patriotic investment. Schools taught children to encourage their parents to buy bonds. Churches framed bond purchases as Christian duty. Social pressure made bond buying nearly compulsory. The campaigns succeeded in raising money. They failed in their larger purpose. When Britain borrowed from American savers, it acquired dollars backed by American gold and American productive capacity. When Germany borrowed from German savers, it merely transferred purchasing power from citizens to the government. No new resources entered the German economy. No external productive capacity became available for German war needs. The distinction proved fatal. German war bonds paid interest in marks. The Reichsbank printed marks to pay this interest. Printed marks increased the money supply without increasing goods available for purchase. Prices rose. The purchasing power of each mark declined. Savers who had patriotically purchased bonds watched their savings erode in real terms. This was inflation by design, though the government refused to describe it honestly. The German financial system became a pyramid scheme requiring constant new bond sales to pay interest on old bonds while printing money to cover shortfalls. Each new bond drive was larger than the last. Each drove prices higher. Each eroded confidence further. The system could sustain itself only through victory. Victory would allow Germany to impose reparations on defeated enemies. Reparations would provide the external resources needed to make bondholders whole. The entire German financial position depended on winning the war. Losing meant financial collapse. German financial officials understood this by 1916. Their memoranda show clear-eyed assessments of the catastrophe awaiting defeat. They kept fighting because surrender meant immediate economic disintegration. Britain faced a different calculus. British defeat would mean losing the war while remaining solvent. Britain would owe money to American creditors, but would retain a functioning economy. Britain could negotiate, retreat, compromise. Germany could not. The Reichsbank's internal communications reveal this terrible trap. German leaders knew by late 1917 that military victory was unlikely. They also knew that peace without victory meant economic apocalypse. They chose to keep fighting. The financial architecture predetermined this choice. Germany was not making free decisions by 1918. Germany was responding to incentives created by its own catastrophic financial strategy. The German home front crumbled before the German army. By winter 1917, the reality of financial warfare became visible in German daily life. Food prices had tripled since 1914. Coal shortages left homes cold. Clothing wore out without replacement. Malnutrition became endemic among the working class. The British naval blockade restricted physical imports. The financial blockade prevented Germany from purchasing goods even when they could reach neutral ports. The combination strangled the German economy. German industrial production depended on imported raw materials: Swedish iron ore, Romanian oil, copper from Chile, cotton from Egypt. When financial channels closed, physical supplies dried up. Ersatz became the defining German word of the war. Ersatz coffee made from roasted barley. Ersatz leather made from paper. Ersatz rubber made from alternative compounds. German ingenuity found substitutes for everything. The substitutes were inferior. Productivity fell, quality declined. The German military consumed priority resources, while civilians went without. This choice maintained combat effectiveness but destroyed social cohesion. Workers watched their families go hungry while war production continued. The implied social contract between state and citizen frayed. John Maynard Keynes observed this process from his position in the British Treasury. His memoranda from 1917 and 1918 document the Allied strategy of economic attrition. The goal was not immediate military victory, but systemic collapse. Time worked against Germany in every dimension. Each month of continued blockade weakened German civilian society further. Each month of continued war drained German financial reserves deeper into the pyramid scheme of domestic debt. Keynes understood the implications better than most. He recognized that German collapse would create conditions impossible to stabilize. A defeated Germany drowning in unserviceable debt would become a source of instability for generations. He warned against vindictive peace terms that would make recovery impossible. His warnings went unheeded. The German military situation remained viable into summer 1918. The spring offensive of March 1918 came close to breaking Allied lines. German troops advanced further than at any point since 1914. For weeks, German victory seemed possible. The offensive failed because Germany lacked the resources to sustain it. Troops outran their supply lines. Horses died from exhaustion and malnutrition. Replacement soldiers arrived without adequate training. Equipment broke without spare parts for repair. The material differential proved decisive. Allied forces could replace losses with American-manufactured equipment paid for with Morgan-arranged credit. German forces replaced losses with whatever the straining domestic economy could produce. By September 1918, German commanders recognized the military situation as hopeless. More importantly, German financial officials recognized the domestic situation as unsustainable. Workers were striking in major cities. Food riots were spreading. Revolutionary sentiment was growing. The choice facing German leadership was whether to surrender before total collapse or after. They chose before. The armistice of November 11, 1918, ended the fighting. It did not end the financial war. Allied blockade continued for months after the guns fell silent. Germany's civilian population continued to starve, while the victors negotiated peace terms. The Treaty of Versailles imposed reparations, demands that Keynes had warned were impossible. Germany owed the equivalent of $33 billion to Allied powers. This sum exceeded Germany's ability to pay under any realistic economic scenario. The reparations debt, combined with the existing war bond debt, created an impossible burden. Germany had borrowed 97 billion marks from its own citizens to fight the war. Now it owed 132 billion gold marks to its enemies. The German economy could not service both obligations. The impossible mathematics found resolution in hyperinflation. The Reichsmark collapsed completely in 1923. German bondholders watched their savings become worthless. The middle class that had patriotically purchased war bonds found itself wiped out. The social fabric tore. This was not an accident. It was the predictable consequence of choices made in 1914. Britain financed its war through external borrowing backed by real assets. Germany financed its war through internal borrowing backed by promises that required victory to fulfill. The structural difference meant that British defeat would have been survivable, while German defeat was not. The men in the wood-paneled rooms understood this from the beginning. Morgan understood it. The British Treasury understood it. Even some German financial officials understood it. They built the architecture knowing where it would lead. The financial system created during World War I did not end when the war ended. It evolved. It strengthened. It became the foundation of the century that followed. Before 1914, Britain stood as the center of global finance. London cleared international payments. Sterling served as the reserve currency. British banks financed world trade. After 1918, New York shared this position. By 1945, New York dominated it completely. The transfer of financial hegemony from London to New York represents one of the most consequential shifts in modern history. It happened not through war between Britain and America, but through war between Britain and Germany that required Britain to mortgage itself to American creditors. Morgan's role in this transfer cannot be overstated. The bank positioned itself at the center of a transatlantic capital flows. It accumulated expertise in international finance that no competitor matched. It built relationships with central banks across Europe. It became indispensable. The Federal Reserve System, created in 1913, grew into its role as global monetary anchor through WWI experience. Benjamin Strong, governor of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, coordinated with the Bank of England throughout the war. This coordination established patterns of central bank cooperation that would structure the interwar gold standard and eventually Bretton Woods. The interwar period demonstrated both the power and instability of the system Morgan built. War debts and reparations created a circular flow of capital from Germany to the Allies to America. This flow depended on continued American lending to Germany. When American lending stopped after 1929, the entire system collapsed. The Great Depression spread from America through the financial channels established during WWI. Banks connected across borders transmitted crisis across borders. The integration that had won the war now transmitted economic contagion. World War II followed from the economic devastation that followed from the financial architecture that followed from the financing decisions of 1914-1918. The chain of causation is clear in retrospect. Keynes predicted it in real time. The post-WWI system learned lessons from this disaster. Bretton Woods established institutions to manage international finance. The International Monetary Fund would provide emergency lending to prevent cascading defaults. The World Bank would finance reconstruction. Fixed exchange rates would prevent competitive devaluations. Yet the core architecture remained American-centric. The dollar became the sole reserve currency. American banks dominated international lending. American financial regulations shaped global markets. The system Morgan helped create became institutionalized under government oversight. This brings us to your present. You carry dollars in your wallet or digits in your account. These dollars hold value because governments and businesses worldwide accept them. They accept them because the American financial system provides infrastructure for international trade. This infrastructure emerged from WWI. When the American government today imposes sanctions on a nation, it uses the financial architecture as a weapon. Exclusion from dollar clearing systems cripples international trade. Freezing dollar-denominated assets immobilizes wealth. Threatening secondary sanctions forces foreign banks to comply with American policy. Russia discovered this in 2022 when sanctions froze $300 billion in central bank reserves and excluded major banks from SWIFT. The Russian experience echoes Germany's experience a century earlier. Financial infrastructure controlled by adversaries becomes a vulnerability. China studies this history carefully. Chinese efforts to internationalize the renminbi, to build alternative payment systems, to accumulate gold reserves, all reflect awareness that dollar dependence creates strategic exposure. China is attempting to build the external financial capacity that Germany lacked. The WWI experience suggests both the power and limits of financial warfare. Germany sustained military operations for 4 years despite financial isolation. Its society held together under extraordinary pressure. The financial weapon worked slowly, through attrition rather than knockout. Modern financial warfare shows similar patterns. Sanctioned nations adapt. They find workarounds. They build alternative channels. They develop domestic substitutes. The pressure is real but not immediately decisive. Yet Germany ultimately collapsed. The financial architecture predetermined the outcome even as military operations continued. Time worked against the financially isolated power. Resources drained. Alternatives proved inferior. Social cohesion frayed. Collapse came not in decisive battle but in systemic failure. This is the lesson of 1914-1918. Wars are not decided by armies alone. They're decided by the systems that supply armies, feed populations, and maintain social order. These systems run on money. Money flows through channels built over decades. Control of those channels is control of outcomes. You were never taught this in school because the men who built these channels did not want public attention. Morgan did not seek credit for Allied victory. The British Treasury did not publicize its desperation. The Federal Reserve did not advertise its coordination with foreign central banks. The financial history of WWI remained buried in archives. Specialist historians examined it. General audiences never learned it. The popular narrative focused on trenches and gas attacks and shell shock. The financial dimension received paragraphs in textbooks rather than chapters. This ignorance serves the interests of those who inherited the system. Public understanding of financial warfare might generate public opposition to financial warfare. Obscurity enables continuation. You now possess knowledge most people lack. You understand that the war beginning in 1914 was decided by 1915. You understand that Morgan's loans mattered more than Pershing's army. You understand that Germany faced impossible financial mathematics years before its generals admitted military defeat. You understand that the same architecture surrounds you today. The same techniques deploy against new targets. The same structural power concentrates in the same channels. The $3 billion in Morgan loans bought more than Allied victory. It bought a century of American financial dominance. It bought the infrastructure through which your money flows. It bought the weapons your government wields against nations it opposes. The loans were repaid long ago. The system they created endures. This is the history they never taught you. The war behind the war, the ledger behind the battlefield, the money behind everything. Now you know where to look.